The report, Connected Communities, uses the word community almost 600 times. I just thought it would be very important to define my understanding of the word, because it's one of those buzzwords in the modern lexicon that is used again and again, almost like a balm on the sores of contemporary society, but we never quite know what it means. And to me, it simply means holding things in common, sharing things, be it parks, gardens, lawn mowers, bicycles, knowledge, resources, buildings, roofs and walls. I mean, it's interesting that we don't often talk about communalism, and I think communalism is a very important part of the matrix of solutions for social problems, that there has to be a residential element to community. It has to mean more than simply divvying up a Victoria sponge once a week, for example. The other side of community, etymologically, munia means responsibility or duty or obligation, a pooling of duties. And actually what we find in our sanctuary is that the more duties you give people, actually the more integrated they are. So if you say to people, you're going to feed the pigs all this week, or it's your duty to make the bread for the entire community, they actually step up and feel more responsible and get an enjoyment from that and a sense of well-being, which is very clear. And the other thing about sharing things is that the holy grail of modern life, I think, is to find a sense of belonging. And that only comes about when you give up the plural, which is belongings, and you actually pull what you own. And some of the most interesting examples of communitarianism are very simple, in which people who live in mid-terrace houses have pulled up all the fences between their gardens, and instead of having a very small suburban garden, suddenly find themselves with 1 or 2 acres, and they only need one lawnmower between them all, or they only need one badminton net, and it becomes environmentally and socially so much more sustainable. Another aspect of communalism and communitarianism is, as Viktor Frankl said about happiness, it's something that can't be pursued, it has to ensue. That very often people say, oh, I want more community, and you say, well, what do you want it for? Well, just to be a community. Actually, unless there's a sense of purpose to why one wants to be a community, it doesn't actually happen. But the most important thing, I think, is that, and part of the reason we find ourselves in this dilemma of trying to find social solutions, is that we are all commoners without a commons. That for the last umpteen centuries, we've had a process of enclosure and privatisation and the creation of metaphorical moats that divide us, turn us into atomised, lonely individuals. And actually, the common denominator of all the people who come to our community seeking sanctuary is loneliness, that they don't have the bonds. And the very exciting thing about David's report is the way in which, if you overcome loneliness, suddenly people's lives are enriched. And one of the sort of the themes that I come back to again and again is that old anonymous folk song that the law locks up the man or woman who steals the goose from off the common, but lets the greater villain loose who steals the common from off the goose. And I think that's what we've witnessed for centuries. That actually, and I don't want to politicise it, but the modern equivalent of that, I believe, is the closure of public libraries, which makes no sense in what we're talking about. So if you or I were to steal a book from the library, we would be prosecuted. If you steal the library from the whole community, nothing happens. In the last 5 years, almost 500 public libraries have closed. Now, in the context of what we're talking about, that just doesn't make sense. That is the nexus in which, in so many communities, people come together and they research things and they read things and they make contacts and they have coffee and they do have the Victoria sponge in the public library. So that is the example of enclosure in which the common has been stolen. And the answer for me to the question of how we can unleash the power of community to address health and social problems is for all bodies, local and national government, to protect and increase the commons, to enable us to share more things. Because, speaking personally from a point of view of a community leader, the thing we struggle with is questions of finances, of legal structures, the very technical things in which us vernacular kind of people who put community together on an ad hoc basis aren't very good at. And were a government able to increase the commons and what we share, then I think a large part of our problems would be solved.